So we are in this powerful series, and we are in the last week of the series. I've been hearing from so many of you that you're enjoying this series, and it's been impactful, and I'm happy to hear that. Where we've been, we started in week 1 looking at the seed stage, the currency of life, and there I talked about that the seeds for us on a mental level and on a metaphysical level are our ideas and our choices, and that is the currency of our life. And we understand that seeds are beneficial, that our ideas and our choices are beneficial, but to really get the full power of the seed, we must surrender our seed to the soil and to the sun. And so in week 2, we talked about the attributes, the characteristics of good soil, of a fertile mind. And I asked the question, do you have a fertile mind, as we looked through that list? Last week, beyond your lifetime, we looked at the manifestation and the establishment of trees. We understand that trees are very profound. One, in the physical world, we understand that trees live for thousands of years. And so there are trees that were here, still standing, that were here when the pyramids were built. And they will still be here when we leave. And so we recognize that then the manifestation of a tree is about something that's bigger than just the current lifetime. That when we're moving from the seed stage and we plant that seed in the soil and we manifest a tree, this is something that will not just benefit your lifetime, but will benefit future generations. And so often we're living in the single seed manifestation, right? We're just thinking about how I can get to next week, how I can get to next month, instead of looking at ways and developing that consciousness so that when we manifest, it's something that manifests, it's something that benefits us beyond just the current moment or the current problem or the current worry, but it actually, we experience abundance throughout our lifetime and beyond. So I want to bring us back to something that I've shared each week because it's important, that as we look at each stage, my desire is for you to use this series to, 1, identify which stage you're currently in related to a desired manifestation. 2, to learn how to maximize and appreciate the good of every stage. And 3, to experiment with the process of manifestation, examine your results, then tweak or modify as needed. Okay? Now, there's something I want to just make sure that we're all clear about when it comes to manifestation. It's something that I'm sure you've heard me say before, but I haven't said it related to this series, and it's important. Every stage is a manifestation. The seed is a manifestation. The soil is a manifestation. The tree is a manifestation. But I want us to understand something bigger, because so often, and those of us that are in New Thought and spiritual circles, etc., will say, oh, I manifested a new job. As though a manifestation, that word is equivalent to a miracle or a fortuitous event or some separate event outside of our lives, right? I manifested a car. I manifested a new lover. I manifested a home. I manifested $10,000. And we speak of manifestation and use it in this way as though it is a single event, as though it's a miracle or it's some separate fortuitous event that breaks the timeline of our normal life. But what a manifestation is simply evidence of, or a demonstration of, or a display of your thoughts. And we are always manifesting because we are always thinking. So when we talk about making sense of manifestation, we're not saying how you can get that thing you want. That's not what this series has been about. When we say making sense of manifestation, we're not saying how can you change some circumstance of your life. What we're bringing our minds and our attention to is that manifestation is happening all the time, so we better understand what's going on, so then we can be more specific about what is being planted, because you're either planting consciously or unconsciously. Again, ideas and choices. Ideas and choices are always happening 24/7. But are you aware of the ideas and choices? Once you become aware of the ideas and choices, then you can choose to plant different ideas and different choices. And so since we are always thinking, we are always manifesting. Again, I'll just say it again. Manifestation is simply the evidence of, a demonstration of, or a display of your thoughts. Very few of us have said to our good friends, oh, I just displayed my thoughts today. I just demonstrated what I was thinking. We don't do that. We say I manifested something, again, as if it's a miracle, as if it's some fortuitous event that has interrupted our current timeline. And so as we are in this fruit stage to talk about today, I want to take us to the words of Jesus because he talks about fruit. As I shared last week, he talks about seeds as well, and he uses this principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as below, so above, to clue us in on a spiritual idea. And in the Gospel of Matthew 7, this is verses 15 through 20, we have something that's very familiar to all of us, and it was based on a conversation that Jesus was having with his disciples. We read these words. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns? Are figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. So first, on the surface specific sense, we understand that Jesus was having a conversation with his disciples about people. And how do you determine if what someone is teaching is beneficial or not? That's the surface of what was happening here. But we recognize that to the extent that Jesus chose to use this idea of good fruit and bad fruit, we can look a layer deeper and start to see that there's some other things going on. And so as we are in this fruit stage, I think it's important that we understand and look at this very simple idea that you will know someone or something by its fruit. In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but bad trees bear bad fruit. And a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. And so this gets us to the idea today that your fruit speaks louder than words. And so as we look at the fruit today, we're going to look at three things that fruit can teach us and clue us in on. Fruit tells us about the past. It tells us about the present, and it also tells us about the future. Now, in terms of the past, the fruit first tells us about the tree, it tells us about the soil, and it tells us about the seed. It's very interesting because the very first thing is when you have an apple, if you stop to think about it, we don't think about this, right? But if you have an apple, that tells you what kind of seed was planted in the ground, right? If you have an apple. If you had an apple in your hand, you would not think that the seed, a pear seed, was planted in the ground, right? There's no way you would think that because you have an apple and you know that an apple seed was required for this thing to come. Yes, yes? And so when we look at our lives and we look at the fruit, we look at the manifestation, it's telling us something about the seeds. Now, so often in our lives, we thought we were planting I am worthy seeds. We thought we were planting I am prosperous seeds. We thought we were planting I am wealthy seeds, but the fruit is anything other than that. Yes, yes? Now, this is not a shame or blame message. That's not what we're saying here. We're just talking about planting seeds. This has nothing to do with the farmer. It has nothing to do with the farmer. We're talking about seeds. And so we recognize it's very important for us to get clear about that when we see fruit in our lives, whatever that fruit may be, no heat, no judgment, we recognize it can help us understand the past. And this is something that I talk about in class all the time, and the reason why I created the manifestation equation, because so often we're unclear when we get an unwanted result. When we wanted to manifest $10,000 and we only got $2, and we literally manifested the $2. Like, it came from somewhere else, right? But it's not the amount that you needed or the amount that you wanted. Then what you can begin to ask yourself as a metaphysician, from this level of mind, from this level of mastery, from this level of maturity, okay, I wanted an apple, but I got a pear. That means pear seeds were planted. Let me go back, because I really didn't think I was planting pear seeds. I really thought I was planting yes, right? In that moment of that unwanted manifestation, we really believed that we were planting the thing that we were desiring. But now that we have the fruit, this tells us something about the past. One of the things that Pastor Yolanda and I do so often as we're working with folks in class, and it reminds me of something that Bishop Carlton Pearson says. He says, I'm never interested in why a person did something. They could have committed a crime. They could have just done something that was just not nice or not kind, not good. I'm interested in what they were thinking before they did it. And so, as I said, the fruit can tell us something about the past. The fruit is really telling you what you were thinking when you were planting. It's really telling you what the ideas and choices were. And this is beautiful. This is spiritual maturity. This is spiritual mastery. Because now we can see, oh, okay, I can look at the past and now see what were those past thoughts that I was thinking. Because then I recognize that those are the things that I can begin to change. Now, as I said also, it can tell us something about the soil. We talked about a fertile mind. And we talked about the fact that the soil has to have certain nutrients within it for certain plants to grow. Every plant doesn't require the same nutrients, and so this is why we have crop rotation, because as you rotate the crops, that actually allows the soil to generate the nutrients that are needed for certain plants over another. And so we can look at that, and we can say, oh, wait, what were the nutrients in my soil? What was I feeding? Feeding this plant, feeding this seed as it began to open up and to grow. What was it receiving? What were the nutrients that it was receiving? And so then we can recognize, as I talked about in that message, and do you have a fertile mind? You know, entertainment, TV, all of that is wonderful, but we recognize that sometimes we need to detox from it because those are, knowingly or unknowingly, those are nutrients. Now, there's lots of positive things we can watch. There are lots of empowering things we can watch. There are lots of inspiring things that we can watch. So again, this is not about don't watch TV or any of that foolishness, right? I'm not saying that. But sometimes, if you recognize that you've been the nutrients in your soil have been consistent of things that actually support a fearful world, for instance. Right? There's a lot of shows, I'm not going to name them. But there are a lot of shows, and it's a serious trend right now, has been for several years, of this kind of, in the movies are doing the same thing, this kind of like end of the world, destruction, something's going to happen, and we all going to die, or it's going to be really bad, right? Promoting this idea that yes, these things can be entertaining, but if we're constantly filling our minds, our soil, with that type of nutrient, it doesn't matter that you planted a seed of prosperity. It doesn't matter that you planted a seed of always expect the good, right? Because there's no nutrients to support it, but there's nutrients to support the weeds that may choke out that seed. Yes, yes? And then the seed, the past rather, can also tell us if there was proper pollination of the flowers. This is something that I love about fruit trees, and I was specifically looking at apples. Because, you know, you have apple blossoms, you have cherry blossoms, orange blossoms, etc. And, you know, why do these trees flower? Right? Because technically, from our perspective, that's not the point, right? We want the fruit. But what's interesting is it's the pollinated flower that becomes the fruit. If the flower isn't pollinated, and this is what happens, interestingly enough, when you look at apple trees, for instance, this is why you have to have multiple trees in order to create the cross-pollination. My favorite apple, for instance, the Honeycrisp apple, cannot pollinate itself, right? It requires cross-pollination, and so you have multiple trees there, and then the bees get involved, and what do? They get the pollen, and then that pollen implants, as we've been talking about in the first 2 weeks, that idea of the masculine and the feminine, it implants the ovary of the flower, and then it becomes pregnant, essentially, and that's what becomes the fruit. So what's interesting then, that past, we can look at, was there proper pollination? Maybe you had the seed, and maybe you tilled the soil, but what were you doing? Because as we recognize that there's this continuous process, what were the thoughts that you were thinking? You may just said, oh, it's a set it and forget it. I'll just say I want this thing and then just leave it alone and go back to doing whatever else I was doing. But when we recognize this pollination process, that means that you have to stay in the positive momentum of whatever it is. This is why, again, that song is so wonderful. I expect things are working out for me. I expect to live in victory. You have to continuously implant your subconscious mind with these thoughts and ideas of good, these thoughts and ideas that are constructive, these thoughts and ideas that things are always working out for you, so that it supports the outpicturing of the fruit that it is that you desire. So the fruit can tell us something about the past. Again, it tells us about the tree. It tells us about the soil. It tells us about the seed. It tells us about the health of the tree. And that takes me into the present. The fruit also tells us something about the present because it tells us how to care for and maintain the tree. Now, in the Gospel of John, and again, this is something that I'm sure is familiar to most of us, John 15, Jesus uses another metaphor, another way to talk about trees and fruit, to teach. And we hear these words, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. And I'm moving on to verse 7. If you abide in me and my words in you, ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. Now, the first thing for us to understand is that this was not an encouragement to worship Jesus. This was not an encouragement for us to put Jesus up above ourselves or anyone else. And so the idea of abiding in me is simply this idea of holding the same consciousness, holding the same types of thoughts that I'm thinking, seeing life in the same way that the Christ always and only can see, this Christ in you, this hope of glory that lives in you, living from that consciousness and from that place, then you can ask for whatever you want and it will be given to you, right? And so this idea of fruit and this idea of pruning is interesting to me. I told you I went to, it's now my favorite website, gardeningknowhow.com. It's just awesome. And I love what gardeningknowhow.com has to say about pruning apple trees. And you read this, pruning not only increases sunlight, shapes the tree and removes limbs that are unnecessary, but also promotes the size of the apple, uniform ripening, ups the sugar content, and decreases insects and diseases by allowing for better overall spray coverage and efficient drying post-rain shower. Now, I love this because, again, as I said, the fruit tells us something to care for and maintain the tree. So if we understand that pruning, and as Jesus talks about, every branch that bears fruit, it's pruned so that it can bear more fruit. And the branches that don't bear fruit, those branches are removed. And so we see something interesting. The size of the apple, based on how the tree is pruned, it determines the size of the apple. So if the apple is small, that means that you might want to prune your tree so you can shift and change the size of the apple. So what would this look like on the metaphysical sense or for our own self, right? So sometimes, and this has happened so much in Master Manifester, one of the things that we do is we set a goal to manifest a certain amount of money. It's really not about the money. It's simply we're using that process to prove principle, right? And so what happens, without fail, everyone manifests some amount of money. That's just by law. Because once you put your focus and attention on anything, you're going to attract something related to it. So, you may set a goal for $10,000 and you may, at the end of the class, $500 or $1,000 is what was manifested, right? And so you have a smaller apple than you actually wanted, right? So then we recognize, pruning is necessary. My forgiveness sheets are necessary. Pruning is necessary. I need to use what I call the law of attraction T-tool and write down what I don't want. And that points me into what I do want. And then I write down the opposite of the don't wants and write down the do wants. And now that's giving me something to focus on. This is what I do want. This is what I do want. Because so often, if I ask someone, what type of relationship are you looking for instance? Well, I don't want somebody that can... And so what happens in that moment, that's where your focus is, and so that's what you're attracting. So pruning is a wonderful way. This T-tool process is wonderful. It's cutting the branches of your don't wants, moving your attention to the do wants, and then that's what's going to promote a different size apple. Also, it says uniform ripening, ups the sugar content, makes your manifestation sweeter. And then also it decreases insects and diseases by allowing better overall spray coverage. So this is where we get into what begins to happen, and I know you've heard me say it, I know you've heard Pastor Yolanda say it, and it's really true, y'all. That as you begin to focus in this way, as you begin to continue to stay vigilant about your thoughts, as you continue to choose love over fear, as you continue to focus on that which is constructive and that which is beneficial, as you do that, what begins to happen is there are certain things that don't even show up in your life anymore. It's that thing of, I love growing up in the church over here, the old saints would thank God for the dangers seen and unseen. It's not that they didn't exist. It's not that they weren't out there, but there's a protection that happens. It's like a force field, that there's just certain things that don't even come your way. And then when the things do come your way that are unwanted or that you don't really like, you're not freaked out. Why? Because you recognize, oh, this fruit tells me something about the past. So let me check in. What was I thinking? What was I doing? But it tells me something about the present. Maybe I haven't been doing my 5-5-5, my daily spiritual practice. That's not an option. I recognize that, there's something that I get to do in the present. 5-5-5, if you all weren't in the class, it's very simple. 5 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of reading something that's affirmative and uplifting for your day, and 5 minutes of affirmative journaling. Not writing about your problems, but you can use a process of, you could create your day, maybe things that you know is on your agenda, and you write about them in a constructive, affirmative way as you would like them to happen. You could write about the things that you're seeking to create. I am so happy and grateful now that, and begin to write about those things in the present moment. You could write an affirmative prayer. But just spend 5 minutes on each, 15 minutes. But what happens, one day turns to another. One day you wake up late and you're like, I don't have time to do that. And so you go on about your day. And then maybe you do it the next day, but then the next day you skip it again. I don't have time to do that. And then you get into this momentum of not having a daily spiritual practice. It happens. And so as you're in that unwanted manifestation, what can I do in the present? This maintenance and care for this tree, my 5-5-5, my daily spiritual practice, that's not an option. I can begin to do those things. And what that does is, as it does for the apple tree, decreases insects and diseases by allowing better overall spray coverage and efficient drying post-rain shower. That's what it does in your life. The other thing I love as we think about this, the word maintenance kept coming to me, and it reminded me of the 12 steps. And in 4Ts, the 4T Prosperity Program is all based on the 12 steps. And these are the 12 steps to prosperity consciousness. But these final 3 steps, no matter where you are or what you're working with, how you're working with the 12 steps, these steps remain the same. And they are the maintenance steps, and they echo everything that we just talked about. Step 10, continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. The fruit tells us something about what we need to do in the present. Because if we do that, if we're constantly keeping our mind and our attention on what we're doing, if we're in our business, yes, if we're in our business, taking a personal inventory of what we're doing. Now, we know how to take a personal inventory about what our mother is doing, yes. We know how to take a personal inventory about what our boss is doing and what our coworkers are doing, yes. We know how to stay out of our business and in everybody else's business. But the maintenance step, what the fruit is teaching us, is that we must continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. Sometimes that's not even about admitting it to someone. It's just that recognition. Say you were going for a job interview, and you didn't get the job, and it was something that you really wanted. You take a inventory, as we just talked about, looking at the manifestation, and you say, you know what? I was in a lot of worry. I remember the night before, I called my good girlfriend, and I was talking about all of the ways that it might not work out and how bad I'm going to feel if I don't get this. And I was talking about how much I really need this money, because take a personal inventory. And when you realize that, then you need to admit it to yourself and forgive yourself for all the wrongs that I've committed against myself, knowingly or unknowingly. I forgive myself, and I set myself free. So this admitting may not always be about someone else or admitting to someone else, and so often it's not. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. That's the daily spiritual practice. Sought through prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation is a part of this path, y'all. I don't know if you knew that already. I hope you did. This is why a principle of CSC is daily spiritual practice is not an option. Not because it's some holy spiritual requirement, but simply because as CSC's mission is to equip humanity to live their greatest lives, we know that you cannot live your greatest life without seeking through prayer and meditation, improving your conscious contact with the all that is, God, the universe, source, whatever feels good for you, as you understand it, praying only for the knowledge of its will, which, what does the chorus say? God's will is for my perfect happiness. So praying for the knowledge to really know that my perfect happiness is all that life in, through, and as me wants. That's powerful. And the power to carry it out. Source, show me. Source, show me, lead me, guide me, and empower me to carry out my perfect happiness. Wow. And then step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And carrying this message to others is not about becoming an evangelist. It's not about being on nobody's corners and worrying people on the subway. But what it is about, and I love how Marianne Williamson really speaks to this, right? We all know and have heard it, right? That your light gives others permission to do the same. How you carry the message out is to be the message. If you apply these principles, and I was thinking about this as it relates to this message. I was thinking about my aunt who transitioned in, it was January of '98. She transitioned after dealing with cancer. And I still remember the eulogy that was preached. And, my aunt was just one of those people that everybody loved. But he said, he was talking about this idea of trees and fruit. And he said, the thing about her, we know who she was because we know her fruit. He said, but some of y'all, I've tasted your fruit, and it doesn't taste too good. And what I recognize is from this idea of being the message, your fruit speaks for you. Your fruit speaks louder than anything you do, anything you say. It's clear. Yes, yes? Y'all know where the good fruit is, and you know where the bad fruit is. And so the next piece, the future. The fruit provides the means to create more fruit. All the fruit that we manifest contains seeds that can be planted again. Yes, yes. Now, so often we're not thinking about that, right? I love to say that we live from faith to faith to faith. So as you use and exercise your faith to create an experience or condition to transform your life in some way, now you have a clear idea of what's possible. And so all of that can now be used for the next thing that you want to create or demonstrate or display in your life. Yes, yes. We live from faith to faith to faith, but unfortunately, so many of us are really living from fear to fear to fear. Because in truth, faith, or rather fear, is simply the misuse of faith. As Bob Proctor reminds us, both are belief in the unknown. Choose one. Fear is belief in the unknown. It's something you can't see, taste, touch, or smell that you've conjured in your own mind. Faith is something that you can't see, taste, touch, or smell that you conjured in your own mind. It doesn't exist as fruit yet. It just exists as a seed potential that hasn't even been planted in the ground unless we focus on it. And we move so often from fear to fear to fear. It has so much to do with, I think, even the world that we've created collectively as human beings. Definitely the world that we've created in this country. We're fearful of certain outcomes instead of being faithful of certain outcomes. And so I want to leave you with this final idea with the seed, and it took me to Think and Grow Rich. And Napoleon Hill, he talks about seed in two very similar ways. One I quote often, but the first way he writes, he says, if the thing you wish to do is right and you believe in it, go ahead and do it. Put your dream across and never mind what they say. if you meet with temporary defeat. For they perhaps do not know that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. Now, he echoes that same thing again where he writes later, every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. And here's what's really deep about fruit and the seed. Again, as the fruit tells us about the past, present, and the future, don't shame yourself for the fruit that you may have manifested. Don't blame yourself. Don't victimize yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Because every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. It's interesting when we look at even how certain varieties of plants or even fruit, how they manifest. Every apple on the tree can taste bad. But if there's just one apple on that tree, out of all the apples that were manifested from that tree, there's one apple that may have the color and the quality and the crispiness or the juiciness that you're looking for. You could look at that tree and say, this tree is a failure. Because 99% of the tree is something you don't want. 99% of the apples is something you don't want, but there's one apple. But what does that apple contain? Seeds. Every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. Every advantage, every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. This is why I love to say life is only good and contrast, and I love them both. Because contrast points me to the wanted. It gives me the clue. It gives me exactly what I need to create what it is that I desire. And so it's so important how we look at life. So often we've looked at our trees that only had one good apple and we said, this is a bunch of mess. We cut it down. But you destroyed the seeds of the good apple that was there. So spiritual mastery and spiritual maturity teaches us to look from this vantage point and say, oh, I have one good apple. There's one good thing that worked out in this business plan. Those are the seeds that I need to plant now. There was one good aspect of this date. They arrived on time. So let me take that seed. Let me take that seed because I recognize that I like people that show up on time and respect their time and respect my time. Let me plant that seed because I recognize I see that good apple. We begin to look for the good and then plant the good and move through the process. Lord have mercy. There's one good thing about this job. Maybe it was just you and your coworkers got along. You had a good time laughing and joking. Everything else about that experience was not something that you liked, but you recognize you like that sense of community. You like that sense of camaraderie. Let me plant that seed. And then I get clear about what are the other seeds that I need to plant to make the rest of that tree exactly what I want it to be. With that, I invite everybody to stand. And so we take a deep breath in and we exhale. We breathe in and we breathe out. Mother, Father, God, God in us, God as us, God through us. That life which is the life behind all life, animating all things, activating all things. That which is ever present, that which is present in the mountain, that which is present in the valley. That which is present in all galaxies, that which is present in every planet, that which is present in me now and present in, through, and as all of my brothers and sisters here and with the sound of my voice. We turn our focus and our attention to you. We turn our focus and attention to you. We go within to the good. We go within to the stillness. We go within to that thing which always is, regardless of what is taking place on the external. And we remember that we are one with you and one of you. I remember this absolute and profound truth that you are operating in, through, and as me, and I am living, moving, and having my being in you. And as I recognize that, I know that all that is true of you, of me. As I recognize and know that, I know that what you are in the large, I am in the small. As I recognize and know this, I know that each and every one of my brothers and sisters, what you are, what God is in the large, so you, my sister, so you, my brother, are it in the small. You contain all of the qualities, all of the attributes, all of the good that ever was and ever will be. And so right here and right now, as we turn our attention to these profound, mystical, beautiful truths, I now speak this word on our behalf. As I am grateful and thankful for nature, I am grateful and thankful for the seed, I am grateful and thankful for the soil, I am grateful and thankful for the trees and for the fruit. I am grateful and thankful for these manifestations on this physical plane that teach us the ultimate absolute truth on the mental and spiritual plane. There is always a seed, there is always soil, there is always a tree, and there is always fruit, and this cycle is never ending. I am so grateful and thankful for the teaching, for the wisdom that comes from nature that reminds me how I create and how I must create. I am so grateful and thankful for nature that shows us that there is more than enough. There are more than enough seeds always. I am so grateful and thankful for nature that shows us that there's more than enough soil, that there's good soil always, that the nutrients are always present in the ground, that the wisdom is always present in the ground. And as the seed is planted in the ground, the rains come to support it. And as the seed is planted in the ground, the nutrients are there in the soil to support it. And as the seed is planted in the ground, there is a sun, there is a magnificent, huge star that is calling it forward, that is calling it and whispering thoughts of love and whispering words of love to it, saying, come up, move up, grow, rise. I am so grateful and thankful to see this principle as it manifests on this plane. And I recognize that that thing does grow. It does become strong. It does become tall. It becomes so strong. It becomes so tall that it lasts beyond generations. And I am so grateful that even as it lasts beyond generations, it continues to produce. It produces fruit and it produces seed in and out of season. I am so grateful for this process because it tells me about myself. It tells me about my mind. It tells me about my thoughts. It tells me about my ideas. It tells me about my choices. It tells me that I have the capability and possibility to create and till my soil, to have a fertile mind so that it is receptive to the good, so that it is receptive to I am worthy, so it is receptive to I am wealthy, so it is receptive to I am abundant, so it is receptive to I am prosperous, so it is receptive to I am healed, so it is receptive to all things are possible, so it is receptive to only good can come from this, so it is receptive to things are always working out for me, so it is receptive to the good that you are, Mother, Father, God. And as my mind is receptive to these seeds, to these ideas, to these choices, to this good, we allow this tree to grow and continue to manifest. And I am so grateful for the daily maintenance steps that support us in pruning the tree, that support us in tweaking the manifestation of the fruit to make it sweeter, to make it larger, and to protect that fruit from anything that is unwanted or that would hurt or harm the fruit. So it is with joy and thanksgiving that I release this prayer. I release it back into this law that is always in operation, this law that takes a seemingly insignificant seed and turns it into a delicious apple. That's the law that I release this prayer into now. For this prayer is a seed that is planted into the fertile ground of our mind. And I expect a magnificent tree. I expect a tree that will last beyond our lifetime. And I expect delicious fruit. So with joy and thanksgiving, we lift up our voices and we say, Amen, Ashe. And so it is. So it is. Thank you, God.